Okay, good morning. We are on Ayin Hey Amud Beis. Yes, we are laughing. You're missing out on all the fun in person. Okay, 75B1, Ayin Hey Amud Beis. Let's go. So we are on the first column. So Amar Le Rabba Bar Chanan Labayim. Ma'ishna Rabbanan Darmi Pnimis Muteres. Okay, so let's go back to, we had a whole bunch of different cases. So we are going to be talking about a case where the people on the inside, people in the inner courtyard, they have an Eruv. They have an Eruv. Okay, people in the inner courtyard have the Eruv. And let's see. Okay, so we have our inner courtyard and our outer courtyard, right? This is the case we've been talking about until now. And then there is a doorway. There are houses, and they all join together in Eruv. They put the Eruv over here. Okay, Eruv. Okay. However, this guy forgot to go ahead and make an Eruv. So the Rabbanan said these people could carry. They could also carry through. These people cannot carry. Obviously, they can't carry. There's someone in their Eruv. There's someone in their courtyard missing an Eruv. Okay, but these people could carry, and the Gemara is going to try to understand why did the Rabbanan allow these people to carry. At the end of the day, they made an Eruv. This Eruv is for everybody. It's one Eruv for everybody. Why are these people allowed to carry? Why is that allowed? Because if they made an Eruv for everyone, this is the question Jesse was asking yesterday. If they made an Eruv for everyone, that means that it's ki'ilu. It's as if there's one courtyard now, and there's just an Eruv. And again, if you had just one Eruv over here, and you had house, and there's an Eruv, and then one person forgot to make an Eruv, what happens in the courtyard? No one can carry. It's done. So why in this case, in a case where it's similar, just happens to be there's this like partial wall over here that these people are allowed to carry, and why is that different than this case? That's ultimately the Gemara's question. The Rabbanan say they could carry, Rekiva says they cannot. So what's the deal? What's going on over here? Okay, so says Amrle Rabba Barchan Labayim. Maishna l'Rabbanan Amri Pnimis Muteres. Why do the Rabbanan hold that the people in the inner courtyard are permitted? Mishum da'achta dasha mishtamsha. Because they could, so to speak, close the door and let their courtyard be used. In other words, they could say, well, yeah, it's true. We're kind of like this, but we're not because we do have this thing, and there is this, this door over here. We could go ahead and take that door and close the Eruv. And basically, even though there's, they're not actually closing the door, but they could figuratively, they could technically close the door and make it as if it's two separate Eruvin, at two separate chatzeros, two separate courtyards. So ask the Rabbi Kiva Nami, Techa Dashim Mishtamish, let them close the door and use their chatzer. Like, why does Rabbi Kiva not accept that approach? So Amrle, Era Margila. Abaye says the reason that the people in the outer one, the reason people in the inner one can't, so to speak, close the door is that since there's an Eruv that belongs to all of them in the inner courtyard, that means that the people in the outer courtyard are kind of used to going in there. In other words, keep in mind, you and I, we don't even know where the Eruv is in Baltimore. And even if we would, maybe we go on like a class trip there, no one's going there like on Charles, like, I'm really hungry for some matzah. I'm going to go grab like some matzah that was there for the past 7 years. It's not happening, right? However, back in the day, right, keep in mind, they did the Eruv weekly. So wherever the Eruv is, right, once the Eruv is set before Shabbos, you could take from it on Shabbos, right? So since the Eruv's in the inner one, we're afraid the people in the outer courtyard are going to be traveling into the inner courtyard, right? Since there is Lamaisa, practically there is no door over here, and this Eruv belongs to all of them, therefore these guys are going to be going in there. And therefore you can't say, we have a door in between you. It's closed between you. It's not. And especially since the Eruv is here, and normally in other weeks, and even this week, they all contributed to it. Therefore, there is passage, there is like traffic between the two courtyards. You can't say, we would have closed it down. Okay? Fine. So Rabbanan Nami, Eruv Margila. The Rabbanan, why don't they accept that argument? In other words, the Rabbanan should also say it's forbidden because the fact that once the Eruv is there, that accustoms the people in the outer courtyard to be traveling into the inner one. So the Gemara says, the Amr l'takune shitaftich velo lavuse. We merged in order to improve the situation, not to make it worse. They could say, okay, granted, you may be walking over here, but we made a partnership. And the partnership was on the premise that things are going to be better for us by making this partnership. I.e., the Eruv that we made was for the sake of making things better. And when we make this partnership, that means that ultimately we are sharing our rights, sharing the things that we have. But we did so with the assumption that it's going to be good for us. We did not accept this partnership on the assumption that things were bad for us, and therefore we want to, this partnership is over. In other words, they could say, in as much as you are going to use this partnership to our detriment, we don't have a partnership. The partnership was premised on the fact that things are going to be good. It's going to let us all carry. But now you're going to tell me, since we have this Eruv in our courtyard, it's going to make things worse for us. That's not really the partnership that we agreed to. So ask the Gemara, top of second column, Rabbi Kiva Nami, Tema Lisakune Shitaftich. Let the people in the inner courtyard say that we merged with you to improve the situation, not to make it worse. So because the people in the outer courtyard could say that what could happen is the people in the outer courtyard could go ahead and relinquish their rights to the people in the inner courtyard. In other words, you don't have to go through this process, or to say better. In other words, let's speak out the argument. I'm in the inner courtyard with my friend over here, and you're all in the outer courtyard. And so the Rabbanan are saying, I could say, listen, we only made this, granted you all come in here to get your Eruv and all that stuff, to enjoy your Eruv, but at the end of the day, we only made this partnership for the sake of making things better for us, and therefore, just treat it as if, like, this whole partnership is done. Treat it as if the wall, there's a door over there. And Rabbi Kiva says, you can't make that argument, since there is a mechanism that would allow us to maintain our space without you being there, and that is bittul. You could go ahead and relinquish your rights, and that would dissolve everything. And since you could do bittul, until you do bittul, everything stands in place. Whereas the Rabbanan are saying, no, before we even get to bittul, before you do a technical or official bittul, we don't want this relationship, and therefore we dissolve the connection between them, and we treat it as if there's a door between them. That's where things are landing. Okay, so V'Rabbanan. So the question is, why do the Rabbanan not agree to that? Because they hold ein bittul reshus michatz lechatzer. Since they hold that, again, these are two courtyards. And remember, we had this discussion earlier. We're going to revisit that discussion, that debate that we had earlier. But the Rabbanan holds that since you cannot actually go ahead and do bittul to us, right? The Rabbanan hold that since we're in separate courtyards, you cannot go ahead and do bittul to me and my friend over here, and therefore, since you can't do bittul, we could say, okay, listen, we only made this partnership for the sake of making things better. Since this is not the way things are actually worse for us with this partnership, we're treating as if we close this door. The partnership is dissolved. And Rabbi Kiva says, okay, you can't make that argument. Okay, I hear the argument, but since bittul could work, you don't have the right to go ahead and dissolve it. If you don't like the way things are working, let the two people in the other courtyard do bittul. The Rabbanan say bittul wouldn't work in this case, because since we're in two separate courtyards, bittul doesn't go from one property to the other. Okay, that's where we leave things off. But then the Gemara points out, wait, this is now Tanaim. In other words, Rabbi Kiva is a Tana. The Rabbanan argue with him are Tanaim, right? They're from the earlier Mishnah generation. We had a machlokas, that we talked about a little earlier in this parak, in this chapter, where Rav Yochanan and Shmuel argued about this particular question. Can you do bittul reshus? Can you do bittul from one courtyard to another? So Lema Shmuel of Rav Yochanan, bipluk Rabbanan of Rabbi Kiva kamiflagi. This would seem to say, okay, basically the way we landed now is that their argument ultimately revolves around whether or not you could relinquish rights you could do bittul, relinquishing of rights from one courtyard to another. We know that Shmuel said you cannot. Rav Yochanan said you could. Does that mean that Shmuel, what we never want to do is have, Amoraim be arguing the same opinions as the Tanaim? In other words, basically what happens is, you have the Tanaim arguing about something, and then after the times of the Mishnah, we no longer have the right to argue with them. We basically say, okay, done. Okay, and now you have the Amoraim, the next generation, the next, people in the Gemara, they're arguing about things that they said, but they're not going to have the same machloksim. Like we basically stop. Like those arguments are done. We could ultimately say we rule like one of them, but we wouldn't rehash their arguments. That's the earlier generation. The same way, Ramosha Feinstein, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach would not be arguing about, saying, they're going to say the same machlokas as Abaye and Rava. That wouldn't make any sense. Abaye and Rava had their machlokas. Okay, you might say, I rule like one of them, but you wouldn't, rehash the exact same arguments. So, we never want to say that the Tanaim are having the same exact argument as the Amoraim. So, that's the Gemara's asking. Lema Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan, biplug Rabbanan Rabbi Kiva kamifli. Does that mean that Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, who argued about whether a person can relinquish rights between one court and another, they're having the same machlokas as there's the Rabbanan and Rabbi Kiva? So the Shmuel Amar Rabbanan, because Shmuel, who said that relinquishing does not take place between two courtyards, he would hold like the Rabbanan who said the same thing over here. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Yochanan, who said that you are allowed to relinquish between two courtyards, would hold like Rabbi Kiva, who said over here, since relinquishing works. So they're both going to say that no, their opinion is not aligned, is not the same machlokas. Why? Amar L'cha Shmuel, Anad Amri Afil Rabbi Kiva. I hold. Now keep in mind, they were actually arguing about a case where you had two courtyards that were actually lined up side by side, okay? The case they were talking about was this case where where the courtyards were, there was no inner and outer. It wasn't like this case where you had to only write a passage. It was a case where you had two courtyards side by side. They were arguing. Shmuel said you cannot relinquish from one to another, and Rav Yochanan said you are allowed to relinquish one to another. That's what they were arguing about. Okay, so let's see how that helps us in any way. Amar lach Shmuel. Shmuel would say, another Rafila Rabbi Kiva. I hold even like Rabbi Kiva, who says that who over here says you cannot relinquish from one to other, would agree with Rabbi Kiva that over here you could relinquish one from another. Why? Because Ad Kalam Kamar Rabbi Kiva Hacha. Rabbi Kiva says this over here. Over here, where there are two courtyards, one inside the other. Okay, 75b2. Da Asran Adadi, because they're restricting one another, right? And therefore, Rabbi Kiva would hold that since they're causing problems one to another, we will allow bittul to take place. In other words, over here, what's the reason they want to do bittul? They want to do bittul because, let's say this person, these people want to travel into this courtyard. Well, we say, we never made an Eruv together, so what are we going to do? We say, no problem. I relinquish my rights. And now, there's no people here, so therefore I'm allowed to travel over here. But before they did that, these people were able to travel over here. They couldn't travel over here, shkach. But over here they were able to travel. It wasn't limiting them in their own space. Over here, before the relinquishing takes place, because they all share this Eruv, Rabbi Kiva would say, Shmuel says that over here, I would agree to Rabbi Kiva that you could relinquish rights because over here, these people can't even travel their own place because you have this Eruv that's in the whole thing. And therefore, these cases are not similar at all. And Rabbi Kiva and I don't disagree at all. Rabbi Kiva says over here, the reason you're allowed to relinquish is because without relinquishing, it's causing problems. Over here, meaning they can't even carry in their own place. Whereas over here, they would be allowed to carry in their own place, and therefore Rabbi Kiva would say, Shmuel would say, you can't relinquish. Okay? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Anad Amar Afilu Rabbanan. I could hold even like the Rabbanan. I, who hold that over here you are allowed to relinquish, right? Would hold even like the Rabbanan, or hold over here you cannot relinquish. Why? Because Ad Kan Rabbanan Hacha. The Rabbanan say that we don't move into relinquishing over here. Because the whole idea of relinquishing over here, relinquishing is actually causing a prohibition. In other words, the rationale to say relinquishing, let me say this in English, 1 second, is basically like this. Again, in this case, they did not make, this guy messed up, okay? So Rabbi Kiva is saying that these people can't close down the door. Why? Because they should just tell them, go ahead and do bittul. Go ahead and do bittul. So what's bittul over here is actually causing a prohibition. It's causing a restriction. In other words, because the Rabbanan say, we don't need to do bittul, let's just close the door. And Rabbi Kiva is saying, but why are you closing the door and dissolving this partnership over here that you made? He could just do bittul. But because of that, Rabbi Kiva says until these guys do bittul, it's actually going to be prohibited. The Rabbanan say bittul over here is actually a stringency because it's causing limitations. Right? Again, Shabbos starts. There's an Eruv over here. This guy forgot to do the Eruv. The Rabbanan. So the Rabbi Kiva says, well, these guys want to go ahead and say, we want to dissolve the relationship. We want to say that there's no connection whatsoever. We're putting up a door over here, as if. And Rabbi Kiva says, why are you doing that? They could just do bittul, and that would cause everything to die. But that means that until they do bittul, though, it's forbidden over here. The Rabbanan say, bittul should never be a stringency. Bittul is an institution of the rabbis to go ahead and make things more lenient, right? And therefore, he says, in this case, bittul, we will not allow bittul because bittul is going to cause a restriction. Aval hasam mikas asur Allah. But over here, in this case, bittul is only going to help, right? In this case, Rabbi Yochanan says you are allowed to bittul over here because bittul is not going to be a problem. Bittul is only going to be a benefit, and therefore the bottom line is Rabbi Yochanan and the Rabbana and Shmuel are not aligned perfectly with the Rabbanan and Rabbi Kiva, and therefore the machlokas of them is not the same as the machlokas Amoraim. Okay, let's move on to the next case in the Mishnah. Vim hayu shel yechidim. The Mishnah said if there were two courtyards and each courtyard had one person, right? Each courtyard had one person. Then in this case, the Gemara said everything's good. Okay, everything's good in this case. One person over here, one person over here. Implication though, if there's two people in either of these places, it would not be good. Right? That's the implication. So the Gemara is going to analyze that. Okay, so if there were individuals, there's no need to join an Eruv together. They're all fine. Amrav Yosef, Tani, Rebbe. Rav Yosef says the name of Rebbe. Okay, Hayu Shlosha Asurim. If there were 3 residents between them, they're going to be restricted. Okay, now 3 residents between them. Not only if there is another person over here, but even if there's another person over here, then this person, although of course they could carry in their own courtyard, but would not be allowed to. When he says restricted, meaning he would not be allowed to go down here. This would not be allowed. Okay, that's what Rebbe is saying. Okay, we're going to explain why in a moment. Okay, I'm going to tell you Rebbe Hirshosha Asurin. Amr Rav Yosef. Amalahu Rabibi. Rabibi says, "Lo tetaisule." Don't listen to Rav Yosef. Okay, who said that he heard this, that this was said in the name of Rebbe. Ana Amrisa Ne'ala. I, Rabibi, said this to Rav Yosef. Remember, Rav Yosef is the one who forgot his learning. This is the first. Usually, we have Rav Yosef who forgot his learning and doesn't remember anything. Over here, he remembers some details, but he mixes up the details. So he says, "I'm the one who taught it to Rav Yosef. Umishmeid Rav Ada bar Ahava Amrisa Ne'ala. I did not say in the name of Rebbe. I said in the name of Rav Ada bar Ahava. And what was the rationale? What's the reason that this is so? Since it would call the outer chutzner a place of many residents, okay, so it may confuse. So since it's a place where there are many, there's 2 people over here, I may confuse it, even though technically this case should really be okay. He's allowed to carry on his own, right? There's no Eruv in this case. Remember, they didn't make an Eruv. So this person's really on his own. He's in his own courtyard. He should be allowed to carry over here, and it's just a rite of passage. He should be allowed to carry. The reason not is because since we say, oh, there are a bunch of people over here, not just 2 people, there are a bunch of people over here, I may confuse this case with this case, right? Which they would be forbidden. There's no Eruv. They would be forbidden to carry over here, and therefore certainly, and forbidden to carry over here, and therefore to ensure we don't confuse these cases, this case with this case, right? Therefore, we say even in this case, we would not allow this person to carry through. That's the rationale behind it. And then Amar Rav Yosef says, Mard Avram, master of Avram. This is like a way of saying, like, OMG. Rabim beRebbi achlafli. He says, I said it in the name of Rebbe. Right? He got confused. He had like some of the words. It's such an interesting like case study. What's that guy? He's the guy, Sachs, Oliver Sacks. He has all these books, like Dr. Oliver Sacks. He has all these books of these like very strange, like unique medical issues. So Rav Yosef over here, it's like a very, he didn't have like Alzheimer's, like he didn't forget everything and like always forget everything. He forgot everything, and then it came back, and some of the details are now like all mixed up. So he said like initially I thought it was that'd be a great study. Anyway, but the point is that he when he said the name of Rebbe, it really was the name of Rebbe, but it was really part of the explanation was the word Rabim, which is similar to Rebbe. So he confused Rebbe and Rabim. The idea was, since it's a group of people, but that's what confused him. Okay, Ushmuel Amar, fine. The Rabim b'Rabbi achlifali. I confused the word Rabim, which was the explanation behind this thing, with the word Rebbe. Okay, Ushmuel Amar, Shmuel disagrees and says l'olam mutares. He says no. In this case, it is permitted. Shmuel says allowed. Ad shnaim b'pnimis v'achav v'chisona. This case, he says, yeah, agreed. In this case, it is going to be forbidden because since they can't carry, if they didn't make an Eruv, they can't carry through this place either. Fine. But in this case, Shmuel says, there's no problem. At the end of the day, this guy, there's no restrictions over here, so I should be allowed to carry between them, and there's no restriction whatsoever. Fine. That is the approach of Shmuel. That's machlokas. What do we do in this case? Shmuel says it's okay. The other, Rav Yosef, in the name of Rav Ada bar Hava, said it's a problem. Rav Elazar. Rav Elazar agrees to Shmuel. Why do I keep on dropping this? Rav Yosef agrees to Shmuel. This case is permitted. However, he says, "V'nachri haruhu karabim." If let's say there was a non-Jew who lived in that upper courtyard, then it's going to be prohibited. Okay, we'll have to see why that's different. Ask the Gemara, why is it that if a Jew lives in the inner courtyard, then you Shmuel and Rav Elazar say it's fine? Demanti yada. Because someone who knows the Jew lives alone, yada, he knows that a Jew who lives alone, it causes no restrictions. If you're one person there's no restrictions. Umanzala yada, and someone who does not know he's alone, we're at now 75b3, Savar Eruve Erev thinks that the Jew who lived there joined in an Erev. In other words, if someone thinks, maybe there's another person living there, because usually one person is living in a courtyard on his own. Hey, so maybe you'll think okay, so maybe he was not alone, but maybe he made an Erev. Okay, nachri nami amrinan. So let's say there's a non-Jew there. We'd say either di yada, either people know it's a non-Jew living there alone. Okay, yada, those will know. De lo yada, someone who does not know that he's alone assumes that other people live there. Savar igure agure ogar would think that the idolater rented it out. In other words, what's your issue with one non-Jew living there? Why is it different than one Jew living there? With the Jew we say, it's fine. Why is it fine? Because either you know that it's one Jew alone, or if you think someone else is living there, you think they made an Erev. No confusion. So with a non-Jew also, either you know he's living alone, therefore there's no problem, or you think that he rented it out if you think someone else is living there, he rents it out. Like, why would there be an issue? So he says, Stam nachri isa de ogar mifapai. If he had rented out his rights, he would talk about it. In other words, he'd say, like, you're not going to believe it. He shmoos every person but him too. Let me tell you, they call me their Shabbos guy, and let me tell you, I paid them, they paid me money to, on Shabbos, for Saturday, so I could be like, it's a bizarre thing. They'll be talking about it, right? And therefore, when it comes to a Jew living there alone, the onlookers will say either one of two things. Either we know it's just a Jew living there, and there's no problem, and if there's two Jews, they made an Eruv, which is like so normal that, of course, it's not going to be like hak. No one's talking an Eruv, it's like everyone has an Eruv. But with a non-Jew, either person knows, fine. But maybe there'll be people who don't know that it's a single non-Jew living there, and they're not going to say, that there's two non-Jew and a Jew, and it was rented out, because if it was rented out, it would be a hak. People would be talking about it, and the fact that people are not talking about it would lead a person to think that there was no rental out, and therefore, when it's just a non-Jew there, it could cause people to misinterpret what took place and come to the wrong conclusion. And therefore, with one non-Jew up above, we are not going to allow that to happen because people will assume that no renting took place and will not realize that the person is living by himself. Okay, last Gemara for today. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Asar Batim Zel Lifnei Mizeh. I'm not going to draw this. You can see this on the bottom. 10 houses all opening up one to another. I pity their lack of privacy. Okay, but basically you see this, right? So you have 2 houses in a courtyard, right, opening up into a courtyard, but the second house opens up into 10 different houses. People say, I need to get to my house. And they'll go in, and they'll walk 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 in, until they get to their house. Okay? So in that case, Pnimi Nosan es Eruv V'dayo. The inner house contributes the Eruv, and then no one else has to contribute to the Eruv. In other words, the 10th house, all the way at the end, they contribute. Rav Yochanan Amar Afilu Chitzon. Even the outer one contributes. Okay? Meaning the house number 1. Ask the Gemara, top of the second column, Chitzon, the outer one, Beis Sharhu. The outer house is called a gatehouse. In other words, the lack of privacy is actually a real thing. There's a halacha we saw a number of times. We never really talked about it, but that is that a gatehouse, right? Sometimes you have a gatehouse, like the place, so they're a little bit of a bigger gatehouse, and people would sleep there, right? That is not considered enough of a house that you would need to join together in an Eruv. Okay, a gatehouse is not an Eruv. So when you have a house that opens up in someone else's house, you're effectively a gatehouse. Right? Right? I mean, it's good security for the people behind you, literally, because, if they steal anything, they're going to steal from the outer house, they're never going to get around to your house. So it's a gatehouse. A gatehouse should not have to be part of the Eruv. So why does Rav Yochanan say that the outer one must contribute? It's a gatehouse. The outer one's a gatehouse. It just opens up into one before it. So the Gemara says, no. Chitzon shel pnimi. What Rav Yochanan meant is that the 9th house, the second to last house, also has to contribute. Okay, so now we have machlokas. Rav Yehuda saying in the name of Shmuel that house number 10 contributes, and that's it. And you have Rav Yochanan saying that number 10 and number 9. Jesse would say, this sounds so arbitrary. Well, what's this all about? So says the Gemara, but what are they arguing about? So Mar Savar, one holds Beishar to Yachid Shmei Beishar, that the gatehouse of an individual is considered a gatehouse. In other words, Shmuel holds that even house number 9 is seen as a gatehouse. In other words, what is the definition of a gatehouse? Let's say one house opens up to another. Is that already a gatehouse? Shmuel says, yeah. Outer house is by definition a gatehouse, and therefore even number 9 is defined as a gatehouse, and the gatehouse we know does not need to contribute to an Eruv. Whereas Rav Yochanan Mar Savar Lo Shmei Beishar, opening up into one house, that's not a gatehouse. When you open up into houses, right, then you can see yourself, that's a gatehouse. The gatehouse opens up into a whole bunch of, is the protection house between other places. But when it opens up into, so therefore Rav Yochanan holds that a house that opens up into one other house, we don't define that as a gatehouse. We just define that as like an uncomfortable living arrangement where the 2 houses open to another. But if you have one house open up to 2 houses, that's already something. And that's why one opinion says that number 10, everyone agrees number 10 is the real house, is a real house, therefore it has to contribute. The question is number 9 opens up into only one house. Is that a gatehouse? Right? If it's a gatehouse, it doesn't have to contribute. If it's not a gatehouse, it does have to contribute. Okay. Have a great day.